A long, long time ago, the world was very different. There were no cities, there were no phones, there were no books. For most of its history, Earth had no humans at all. Our story begins in Africa, about 2.5 million years ago. An animal, not much different from an ape, gave birth to the first humans. We call this genus Australopithecus. These early ancestors were not the kings of the savannah. They were not at the top of the food chain. They were prey. They feared the roar of lions in the night. They hid from eagles in the day. They were just another animal trying to survive in a dangerous world. Over many thousands of years, these early humans began to change. They spread out from Africa, walking into Asia and Europe. As they moved, they evolved. Different groups of humans appeared: Neanderthals, Europe, stocky and cold-adapted; Denisovans, Asia, mysterious; Homo erectus, upright, long-lived. For a very long time, Earth was home to several human species at once. It was a world of many different kinds of people, all part of the same extended, complicated family. What was our secret? What made Homo sapiens so successful? The answer is not in our bodies, but in our minds. We call this change the cognitive revolution. It was a shift in how our brains worked. This revolution gave us a new kind of language. Other animals can communicate, of course. A monkey can shout, "Careful, a lion!" Another monkey can shout, "Careful, an eagle!" But a human can say, "This morning by the river, I saw a lion stalking a herd of bison." We can talk about things that are not right here, right now. It allowed us to talk about things that do not exist at all. Spirits, legends, myths. We could tell stories. This ability to speak about fictions is the most unique feature of our language. You can never convince a chimpanzee to give you a banana by promising him endless bananas in chimpanzee heaven after he dies. Only sapiens can believe such stories. This ability to create and believe in shared myths allowed us to cooperate in ways no other animal could. It was our secret weapon. Long before the cognitive revolution, our ancestors began to use tools. This was a critical first step. About 2.5 million years ago, early humans like Homo habilis or handyman began to chip stones to create sharp edges. These were not complex tools. They were simple choppers and scrapers, but they were revolutionary. The next great leap was the mastery of fire. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans probably used fire opportunistically, taking it from a lightning strike. But around 400,000 years ago, some human species, perhaps Homo erectus or the Neanderthals, learned how to create and control fire at will. This was a game changer. Most importantly, it allowed humans to cook their food. Cooking made food easier to digest and killed dangerous bacteria and parasites. Our brains are incredibly energy-intensive. They make up only about 2 or 3% of our body weight, but they consume 25% of our energy when we are at rest. Fire and cooking provided the fuel for our brains to grow larger and more complex. With bigger brains came better language, the third superpower. Language gave us power over each other, allowing for the cooperation that would define our species. For almost all of our history, we were hunter-gatherers. We lived in small mobile bands. We followed the animals. We followed the seasons. We worked fewer hours than most people do today. Our diet was varied and healthy. We had few possessions. We had few diseases. Life was not easy, but in some ways it was a good life. Then around 12,000 years ago, somewhere in the hills of the Middle East, some sapiens began to do something very strange. They started to spend all their time taking care of a few specific plants, like wheat. They started to spend all their time taking care of a few specific animals, like goats. This was the beginning of the agricultural revolution. On the surface, it seems like a great idea. Why wander around looking for food when you can grow it right outside your door? But was it really a good deal? The agricultural revolution is perhaps the biggest fraud in history. The evidence suggests that, for the average person, life got harder, not easier. Farmers had to work much longer hours than hunter-gatherers, doing back-breaking labor like tilling soil. Their diet became much worse, relying on just 1 or 2 staple crops like wheat. People were also living in one place, surrounded by their own waste and their animals. That created a perfect breeding ground for diseases. Epidemics became a new feature of human life. The surplus of food created by agriculture had a monumental effect. For the first time, not everyone had to be a farmer. They could become soldiers. They could become priests. They could become kings. They could become artisans. People began to gather in larger and larger settlements, villages, towns, first cities, Mesopotamia, Uruk. Uruk bustling with thousands. This was a completely new way to live. It required new ways of organizing society. How do you manage thousands living together? The answer, once again, was imagined orders. To govern these new cities and kingdoms, leaders created elaborate stories, gods, kings, laws. To manage the complex affairs of a city, another invention was needed: writing. The first writing systems, like cuneiform and Sumer, were not used to write poetry or philosophy. They were used for accounting. The king's officials needed to keep track of taxes. Writing was a method for storing and processing huge amounts of data. It was the birth of bureaucracy. Without writing, it would have been impossible to manage the vast resources of a city, let alone a sprawling empire. For most of history, humanity was divided into thousands of small separate worlds. A person in China and a person in the Americas might as well have been on different planets. They had no idea the other existed. But over the last few thousand years, these separate worlds have been merged into a single global civilization. Three great forces drove this process of unification: money, empires, universal religions. These were three imagined orders that could appeal to almost everyone, everywhere. First, there was money. Before money, there was barter. I will give you 3 chickens for that axe. This works in a small village, but it is very inefficient. Money solved this problem. The first money was something like barley or cowrie shells. But eventually, coins made of gold and silver appeared. The genius of money is that everyone wants it. Second, there were empires. Empires, by their very nature, were melting pots. They conquered diverse peoples and forced them to live under one rule. Third, there were universal religions. These religions gave millions of people a shared identity that transcended their local loyalties. For thousands of years, human knowledge was based on tradition and religion. The great books of the past, the Bible, the Quran, the works of Aristotle, were believed to contain all the important knowledge in the world. The assumption was that everything worth knowing was already known. This mindset began to change about 500 years ago in Europe. A new revolution began: the scientific revolution. The foundation of the scientific revolution was a single, radical idea: the discovery of ignorance. Modern science is based on the admission that we do not know everything. It accepts that the knowledge we think we have might be wrong. This willingness to admit ignorance makes modern science much more dynamic and curious than previous traditions of knowledge. It drives us to make new observations, conduct experiments, seek out new information. This new approach required a new language: mathematics. Scientists began to believe that the book of nature was written in the language of mathematics. This marriage of observation and mathematics gave science its incredible power. For millennia, human power depended on the energy from plants and the muscles of humans and animals. This fundamentally limited what we could do. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain around 1750. It shattered this limitation. The key breakthrough was learning how to convert heat into movement. The steam engine was the first machine to do this efficiently. By burning coal to heat water into steam, we could power factories, we could power trains, we could power ships. Suddenly we had access to almost limitless amounts of cheap energy. The world would never be the same. The Industrial Revolution changed every aspect of human life. It led to the mass production of goods in factories, textiles, iron tools. Millions of people left their farms and moved to new, rapidly growing industrial cities to work in these factories. Society was restructured around the clock and the factory whistle. Time itself became standardized as railways needed precise timetables to function. Today, in 2025, humanity stands at a crossroads. For the first time in history, more people die from eating too much than from eating too little. More people die from old age than from infectious diseases. And more people commit suicide than are killed by soldiers, terrorists, criminals combined. We have, to a remarkable degree, managed to control the ancient enemies of famine, plague, war. This is an unprecedented achievement. We have become more powerful than the gods our ancestors worshipped. We can create and destroy life. We can reshape the planet. Having dealt with the old problems, we are now setting ourselves new goals. The new human agenda for the 21st century looks something like this: to achieve immortality, to achieve happiness, to achieve divinity. Bioengineering, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence. This quest raises profound questions. What will happen to society if some people can afford to live forever while others cannot?